So here is the final video in this little series I've done on the best cheap players in each position. And this time we're talking about the forwards. Right then, so like I did with the midfielders, I'm going to start the pricing at 6.5 million and work my way down through every category. Unlike the midfielders video, there is a player under each category in this video, so stick around to see who they are. Now, our first 6.5 million striker is Dominic Solanke. For me, he's absolutely nailed in that Bournemouth starting 11. The only reason he really missed games last season was down to injury. Whenever he was fit, he was playing. He also takes the penalties, so regardless of how he performs like on the pitch normally, he always has that to fall back on. For me, I think he's just a safe pick for the price. I don't think he's going to light the world up by any stretch next season, but I do think he's going to get, a similar, if not slightly better level of returns than he did last year. I think Bournemouth could well kick on under their new manager, and Solanke's still relatively young, so he might kick on as a player as well. And just a general point, he did bits in my team last season. I remember bringing him in on a wild card, and for 3 or 4 weeks, and I'm pretty sure he scored every game week that I had him in my team. So he deserves an honourable mention just for that. Now, next up is a man who was an absolute hero for Nottingham Forest towards the back end of last season. I'd actually suggest his goals were probably the sole reason that they stayed up. He didn't start all the games. He played 27 of the 38, but he had a really good set of returns in the games that he did play, and especially towards the end of the season. He scored 6 in the last 4 games that Forest played. Got to think, unless they sign Iheanacho, which is a little bit of a worry for one of these minutes, yeah, man, you got to think he's a good option. And 0.71 expected returns per 90 is nothing to be sniffed at. That's the likes of, Ollie Watkins, Gabriel Jesus, and, Kane was on about 0.8. It's close to those kinds of players, and that's a big compliment for a player like this. So, if we get a bit of intelligence that he's going to play for Nottingham Forest at the start of the season, I think he's a great option. 6 million up next. Those are the two I've gone for at 6.5. Just a general comment as well. I might be missing players out in this video that you think should be in it. This is my opinion of the best players in each position. So the comment section is there if you agree or disagree with any of my thoughts. I'd be interested to know. Ultimately, FPL is always about people having different opinions. Otherwise, you'd all have the same team, right? So if you've got a different opinion to me, I'd be interested to hear it in the comments. So next up, we've got 2 Brighton strikers that are priced identically at 6 million. We've got Evan Ferguson and Danny Welbeck. And what I thought I'd do here, similar to what I did on the midfielders video between the Brighton midfielders, you can check that out if you want to see that comparison. But I've compared them basically on goals, assists, XG, expected returns per 90, and the number of starts that they got. And from the stats alone, it's clear to see obviously that Welbeck played more, but when he did play, Evan Ferguson was much more effective. You were looking at 0.76 expected returns per 90 for Ferguson, compared to 0.44 for Danny Welbeck. And I feel like most of the starts from Ferguson came towards the end of the season. I'd like to think that if he's fit come the start of the year, just based on those stats and how he performed, I think Ferguson is going to be the first choice striker for Brighton. There's so much, they've got so much football basically. They're going to be playing in all the, obviously the UK Cup competitions and expected to go quite far. And they're in the, European football as well. So you're going to see rotation between these two players. But maybe Ferguson could be the first choice in the Premier League and we see Welbeck featuring in the Cups in Europe. I mean, remains to be seen. They also have João Pedro mixed in now who can play up top. Just so much to choose from in terms of those Brighton attackers. But for the time being, I would say Ferguson of the two is probably the best. Next up, we've got Wissa of Brentford coming in again at 6 million. I think he's a great option in Tony's absence, and I think he's pretty much nailed to play in that Brentford team. He featured in all 38 games that Brentford played last season. He only started 16, but he came off the bench in all the other 22 fixtures. That leads me to believe that he's going to be playing up top in place of Ivan Toney. He was, at least last season, the bench option for them. Given Toney's going to be out until January, you've got to think that Thomas Frank likes to rely on Wissa as a backup option. And his expected returns per 90 are really good, 0.56. That's of the level of players we've seen at higher price gradings. And in the midfielders video, that's a bit higher than what the Brighton mids are getting. I think he's likely to have better numbers without Toney in the team as well. When he's been coming off the bench, Toney's still been on the pitch as like that 90-minute man and probably getting the ball a bit more. But without Toney on the pitch, Wissa might be the target man or at least the man in the middle of the box getting the chances. So got to think those returns might go up a little bit. And yeah, just in general, I think he's got to be nailed to play in that Brentford team without Toney. Barring any signings, I mean, remains to be seen if Brentford actually sign a striker to replace Toney. It'd be a bit of an odd one, really, given I think they just have to wait until January and rely on Wissa. So it's It's a great opportunity for Wissa to prove himself in the Premier League and a great opportunity to maybe put him in your team. And finally, this is a bit more of a Hail Mary and out of character for me to be picking him in my team, I think. But Calvert-Lewin, I think you've got to consider him as an option if he's fit and playing regularly for Everton. And in my opinion, he is, in terms of attacking returns last season, he might not be. But in terms of ability as a striker, I think he's the best of all of them below 7 million. He should be on the penalties when he's on the pitch as well. And I just think, his style, being the man in the box on the end of crosses, really suits the Sean Dyche system and the way that he'll want to play. I also think, and give him his respect, he didn't really get a chain of games together last season. He was injured so much, he probably played a maximum of like 4 or 5 games in a row from memory. Even that was probably a bit of a stretch. It might have even been 2 or 3. And he just couldn't get himself fit. And I think that really played to his detriment, where he just couldn't get a run of games to get match fit. And he just couldn't perform at the level that he wanted to. He just seemed to be injured so much. And I've used Antonio as an example because I remember a couple of seasons ago, Antonio would play 3 or 4 games, get injured for a few months, get back in the team, play 3 games, get injured again. Last year, something changed in Antonio and he started regularly. And I think Calvert-Lewin was getting similar injuries to that of Antonio. So if Antonio could turn it around, I'd like to think Calvert-Lewin could too. I hope so, because I really like him as a player and I like his play style and I want him to be an FPL option. I don't think he's one to start with, certainly in my opinion, because of just that injury risk. But if he can chain a few games together and prove his fitness once again, I think he's pretty much hard to ignore as an option. 6 million for Calvert-Lewin. I remember seasons gone by, he's a 15 goals a season player in my opinion. So if you can find those levels of form again, he's a great option. All right, there are, I'll admit, fewer and fewer players as we go down the price categories. Here we are at 5.5 million. I said there's very few. There's only one at this price category that I would back to play regularly, and that's Ndiaye of Sheffield United. Now, in my opinion, and both my opinion and watching him as well, I'm a Bristol City season ticket holder, so I saw him play twice last season at least. He is by far and away Sheffield United's best player. I think they're going to be holding on to him going into the Premier League. It would obviously totally make sense for them to, which means he's absolutely nailed to start. And you can see in his goal contributions, it was both goals and assists. He was just unbelievably their talisman last season, right? He was by far the best player in terms of goals and one of their most creative players as well. The one point I would say, I made a best promoted players video back along. You can check that out if you want to. But I found out that really promoted players on average get 35% of the returns they did in the Championship the season before. So being promoted in the Premier League, what's that, 25 returns? He's going to get 35% of that in the Premier League. So what's that, 6 or 7, I think? It's not great. So, 5.5 million, I think you're going to get what you pay for with Sheffield United. They haven't really improved their team massively. To be honest, I'd probably back them to get relegated this season, sadly. But I do think Ndiaye is going to get some attacking returns to justify that price tag. And he's the only one really at this price that I think will play regularly. Right, then moving down. One more player at this price category, 5 million. And that one player is Adebayo of Luton. Now, he might not have been Luton's top scorer last season by any stretch. I'm pretty sure Morris got 22 goals in the Championship compared to Adebayo's 7. But in my opinion, he is Luton's most talented and best player. It's the only 5 million striker in the game, really, that's going to play most games. You saw he played 42 of 46 games in the Championship. And I think, to be honest, maybe Premier League football might actually suit him even more. Yeah, 7 goals, 3 assists in 42 games, and he massively underperformed that XG. He had an XG of basically 13 and only scored 7 goals. So maybe things will turn around next season where we start to see, to be honest, a similar level of returns because he catches up with his XG. I think he could be an option if you're looking to play a 4-5-1. I've built a draft, and you can see it on my Twitter, but I've built a draft with Salah, Trent, and Haaland in it. And the way I've done that is by playing a 4-5-1, and Adebayo has been my first player on the bench. I think, spending 0.5 million more than the minimum price for a striker is a wise thing to do to fit him into your team as like that first bench option. I don't think you can play in having like a starting Luton striker as your first bench option. I think that's pretty decent. And just looking at his historic returns as well, last season wasn't even his best season. He had 16 goals in the 21-22 season. So looking across the board, he seems to be a pretty decent player in terms of returns. And last season, he was just off the ball a little bit in terms of his finishing. So if he can refine the form of 21-22, it's a similar level of option to Ndiaye that we've just spoken about. So yeah, it remains to be seen how good he can actually be, but he's really the only one at this price you can go for. All right, 4.5 million now. And I've got to say, I don't back any strikers at this price to play regularly, right? But there are two that I think are worth considering. Some might require a transfer for it to be so. Speaking of players that need a transfer, we've got Balogun of Arsenal. Now, he was on loan in League One last season, and he scored 21 goals in 37 appearances. And he actually had basically 27 expected goals. So, you know, if you look at the expected data, he could have got even more. Now, you know, a guy that could have scored 27 goals in French football last year, you got to think that Premier League clubs are going to be sniffing around for him, particularly if he's not going to be featuring in the Arsenal team, which I just can't expect him to, can you? You've got Gabriel Jesus and Nketiah, who's a perfectly decent Premier League striker, probably ahead of him in the pecking order. So I'd like to think that Arsenal are either looking to loan him out to a Premier League team or maybe even sell him. And I think the Premier League team that does pick him up, if they play him regularly, is going to be an unbelievable option at 4.5. Now, I know that's a long chain of events of things to happen to make him pickable, but with that form in League One, he's definitely worth a mention in this video. And one final player, and that's Antoine Semenyo. Now, I mentioned before, I'm a Bristol City season ticket holder. Semenyo was arguably our best player, well, up until he left to join Bournemouth. I think they signed him for a relatively large fee, and I can't believe for the life of me that he isn't going to start at least some Premier League games next season. Of all the 4.5 million strikers, I think Semenyo is the one that's going to get the most minutes. He started only 2 in the Premier League last year, but did feature in 11, and his expected returns per 90, I know they're only 0.35, but compared to other players at this price, I think that's pretty good, or at least this sort of price category, that's pretty good. And it is in the Premier League as well, whereas other players we're looking at, we're comparing to other leagues or the league below in the Championship. So obviously Balogun, if he signs for a Premier League team, he's going to be by far and away the best 4.5 million striker. But as things stand, with players being at the clubs that they're at, I think Semenyo's the one to get the most minutes, and he's currently my 4.5 million striker. All right, and that's the end of the video. A little one there to round off the series of the best cheap players in every position. Like I said in one of the price reveals, basically, there might be some players here that I've missed out that you disagree with, and I want to know about that in the comments. That's what the comments are all about, and that's what FPL is all about. Different opinions and people with different ideas. So please let me know if you've got some suggestions I haven't mentioned here. I won't be offended if you disagree with me at all. If you like the video, please leave me a like rating and subscribe to the Golden Goal channel, which should be, I keep pointing in the wrong direction, should be just there. And I'll see you in the next one.